Good morning to you, my friends, wherever you may be in the world today. Alan Clements here from Maui, the occupied islands called Hawaii by the United States of America. Here it is, August 30th, 2021. And today's sharing, I'm hoping, planning that the whole week will be based on this theme. And I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain. But what are the most important questions? I know it's presumptuous. What are the most important questions that one can ask of themselves? And for the purpose of elevating the good, the true, and the beautiful, and overcoming the denigrating through thought, speech, and action as much as possible. How to engage the dilemma of being born in this world, and I do call it a dilemma, forced to participate in an existence beyond our own making, compelled by instinct, procreation, food, rest, communication, social interaction, compelled by instinct to participate based upon these impulsions of God, of the substratum. And we find ourselves, to state the obvious, at one point or another, going beyond just living in the expression of innateness to the self-questioning process. Why is this happening to me in the way that it's happening? What can I do to enhance the quality of my desire system? What can I do to mitigate the struggles, the stress, the anxieties that I perceive or anticipate? And that self-questioning process is the basis in many ways of religion, of philosophy, obviously, of psychology, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, existential intelligence. The books in the libraries, the digital archives are filled with attempts to illuminate the nature of being born into this world based upon barely distinguishable conditions. We don't really know why. And here we find ourselves in August 2021, participating in the event called God, the Dhamma, samsara. So thank you for being in my life. Thank you for participating in this journey. What are the questions? And I'm going to get into these. What are the questions? Let me just provide a context for this. For many decades, many of you who've been following my work, especially since the crisis in the former Yugoslavia, which was a turning point for me from being kind of an avant-garde maverick Buddhist to not an atheist, but back to the original premise of I don't know. Because of being in that war, although as a non-combatant and primarily safe most of the time, there were events and encounters that obliterated my certainty and opened me to a deeper, reconstituted journey, adventure of awakening. And it was primarily in the village township in Bosnia, in Srebrenica, many of you will know. It's the scene of one of the greatest tragic massacres of human life in the world, in Asia, in Europe, in modern times. Something close to 8,000 Muslim boys and men were so-called protected by United Nations peacekeeping forces in the town of Srebrenica in a soccer stadium, and the paramilitary, the Bosnian Serb paramilitary, came and took the men and the boys away from their families, their sisters, their mothers, their grandparents, and systematically executed them. Srebrenica. I was there not long after that massacre, and seeing the mass graves, smelling the decomposing bodies, there was something in that tragic event that catalyzed me at a level that I had not been catalyzed prior to that point. And it wasn't just that point, it was an accumulation of many intersecting points of controversy and complexity that brought me to the edge of my own understanding, and I went down on my knees that day, not unlike today. And I wanted to know a Dhamma, a Dharma that was trans-religious, trans-spiritual, that was trans-ethnic, that reinvigorated what are the elements within my own consciousness that can be discerned, that when employed, the constituents of consciousness that when known and employed lead to the overcoming of greed, anger, and delusion. Not the belief systems, not the philosophies, not the religions, not the ism, not my dogma, not my need, not my enlightenment, but the deep invenerating process, the courageous process to feel anew. And how can I participate in this paradigm called life to overcome these potentials of Srebrenicas? Now, that was the birth for me of a thing called World Dharma. I didn't know what else to call it. A trans-conceptual, trans-dogmatic, trans-orthodox, trans-traditional, call it Consciousness 2.0. I just want to know that which releases human consciousness from greed, anger, and delusion and fear, and participate in the end of genocide, participate in the end of ethnic cleansing, actively participate. I know you're there with me. Actively participate in the end of violence. And it's one of the reasons why I was in Burma post-monastic life, was to study and to feel and to participate as an outsider, never an insider. I'm an American in a foreign country, but with Burma's non-violent revolution of the human spirit, a true revolution of consciousness beyond ideology, tradition, and religion. It was led by Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, U Tin U, U Chi Mung, U Win Tain, U Win Tin, tens of thousands of other men and women, many of them who lost their lives, many of them who still today are behind bars, being imprisoned and tortured. But it gave me hope, is what I'm pointing to here. I'm going to connect the dots. It gave me hope in the possibility of a trans-monastic, trans-Buddhist, trans-meditative dynamic where consciousness could be employed by any human being in any country, in any world, with any politic, who was dedicated to nonviolence, looking at consciousness as the vehicle to transform consciousness, to transform society, a spiritualized politic. Because look at that gave me hope, because look right now at the absence, truly the absence of leadership. It's not just with what's happening in the collapse of the Biden regime, the collapse of the United Nations, the collapse of Burma. Why do we have to keep trying to figure out how to stop killing one another? 13 Marines obliterated at the gate of the Kabul airport. Hundreds of other Afghan civilians obliterated at the gate of the Kabul airport. 20 years, a microdot in history of a forever war. A phrase that is so sickening to think that there is an industry, an incorporated industry of the forever war, a perpetual cash cow of profiteers in privilege and power who ka-ching off massacre, murder, rape, weaponry, and use and abuse the ideology of freedom and democracy and human rights in the declaration of the heart of independence. So easy to read the paper and put it down and take your walk and do your yoga, to drink your wine, to move and through and just live, knowing that we're in an environment of Srebrenicas, always in the making, ready to explode based upon the unmindful disregard for righteousness and narcissism and violence in the mind of men and, of course, women too. And the next thing you know, we have a Srebrenica in Hawaii. We have a Srebrenica in Japan. We have a Srebrenica in Kabul. We have a Srebrenica in Pakistan. These are minor events. People don't even know about Srebrenica. Look online. These explosions of ignorance that result in the travesty of an unrecognized human behavior to kill and to violate in the name of. 13 Marines dead in Afghanistan. 20 years of forever wars. $2 trillion, they say, is spent in Afghanistan. $7 trillion spent in Iraq. $9 trillion. I can't even count to a million. $9 trillion. 10,000 American lives dead. 50,000 injured. Is it something like 60 suicides a day in my country of veterans dealing with the consciousness that's been so presented as PTSD and trauma? Those are just mild terms for the convulsions of imagery and emotionality, the ruptures of coming back into a so-called democratic nation. We all know what it means to do a microdose or a medium dose or a high dose of the psychedelic, and all of a sudden, with good music, with a lover, walk through society and go like, oh my God, do I feel displaced? Imagine having dedicated your life to freedom and democracy, and you find yourself in that context, so-called fighting the good fight, and to be abandoned on so many levels and coming back to America, and you see the lies, you see the need for profit and privilege and the pornography of how our own politicians are banned from social media, and we find unlimited Twitter accounts of the Taliban. There's something so wrong. And I wish I had answers. I wish I knew the families of those people just on the verge of committing suicide, and how many other thousands of boys and girls, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of boys and girls, right at this very second, probably your own wife or husband, son, daughter, friend, uncle, that you know in your town, your city, your church. You perhaps kneel next to her or him in your own congregation. And the next thing you know, you ask, where is Carol? Where is Charlie? And you hear in the paper, he or she or they both took their life. Overdosing with drugs or a bullet in the chest, and not to mention the domestic violence based upon these deep ruptures of the soul. A massive air base now in Afghanistan. minutes away from just simply being abandoned in this new super terrorist state, a caliphate. Bona fide jihadist with one desire is to create Sharia law worldwide. I'm not anti-religion, I'm just anti-obsession that led to the ideology of a Srebrenica. And it can happen with a Christian, a Jew, an atheist, a Buddhist. How many Buddhist suicide bombers came out of Japan? How many Hindu women from Tamil Nadu went to Sri Lanka and blew themselves up? It's not a Muslim thing alone. Human life losing touch with conscience. I'm coming back to what are the questions we can ask ourselves. This week, I decided, along with my colleague, Fergus Harlow, based upon the good support of two patrons, Terry and Ian, and their beloved daughter, Gemma, we have now finished 40, I would say, my best attempt at presenting my learned lessons over 5 decades of meditation, Buddhism, travel, activism, art, merged into 40 10-minute videos, which are going to be offered freely in a World Dharma anti-course. This is all about supporting the uniqueness of the human psyche and trying to find common ground inside for everyone in the world. My vain, basic human attempt with Fergus and a lot of other people, putting everything we can into these videos. They've been edited. I tried to make them as simple as possible. They've been subtitled by Gemma, beautifully edited. Fergus has gone through every one of them and put them into 3 tiers and 3 sequences with titles and captions. And I'm going to work this week to outline a World Dharma workbook that can be downloaded as a PDF, where you can ask yourself the questions that are being presented, to invite yourself to ask the questions that you want to ask of yourself. What is it in your heart that you want to know more than anything to transform the edge of your own presence in such a way that it radically awakens the most precious qualities of your life as that which defines why you're alive? I want to place such high stakes that activism isn't just marching on the streets or writing protest songs, but it's a day-to-day activity that we can participate in, a World Dharma unique to you, just like a fingerprint is unique to you. No two of us will do it alike. This World Dharma course that's coming out very soon, we're going to offer it on YouTube, freely. Don't even need your email address, offered freely, along with a free downloadable workbook where you can invite yourself to ask the questions and write your own Dharma books. Follow your own unique World Dharma path, that you have a touchstone every day of your life, your own unique yoga, your own unique expression of meditation. I'm going to take delight in creating these questions over the week. I'm trying to get to them. I have many, many notes, but I really want to drive the point home. Each of us can participate in the transformation of our own lives if we so determine that that is the priority of who we are. Twofold: how to work with consciousness in self, how to work with consciousness in context. Those 2 dimensions will be explored in the 3 streams of thought, speech, and action, through the 6 senses, through the 3 time frames of before something happens, while it's happening, and after it concludes, in all postures, all times, all contexts, all states, all degrees of complexity, and all degrees of challenge. That level of all-inclusivity. I want to present questions that can support your own process to be unique to you, so you can stop buying Dharma books or spiritual books and really know that you're creating your own unique world Dharma path. Self-therapy, self-meditation, self-Dharma practice. Let me conclude. Perhaps you read the article, as I did this morning. It may have been in the New York Post, of how 280, I think, Afghan girls and women who've been learning and training in musicality and orchestra, some of the finest talent in Afghanistan over the last 2 decades. These women and girls, musicians and singers, Afghan's orchestra, taken to the Kabul airport. 17 hours on a bus without food and water in the unthinkable August heat, midsummer in Kabul, Afghanistan, waiting with visas and approval to come into the airport to fly out on these last flights in these last few hours. And they were refused by the American government at the highest level of our leadership to enter the airport and fly to safety. 393 feet from freedom. And I imagined, as I read this article, as I feel into this particular issue right now, in a nation, in a country under the Taliban, a radical jihadist, super orthodox killing machine, outlawing women to show their face, to sing, to dance, to play music, if maybe behind the veil of everything, not to mention being treated like livestock and likely raped, if not maimed, because of their association with the West. That is their life. There's something so utterly heartbreaking about that. And it makes me want to scream both at the American regime, the unthinkable incompetence and betrayal of the human psyche within the American dream, the craziness of this type of behavior on a planet, in a cosmos, the juxtapositions of safety and love and sex and intimacy with horror and torture, and a mini Srebrenica with the same level of violence that's going to take place with these 280 women and girls, multiplied by thousands, if not millions of others. And this is what we deal with today in the midst of a global pandemic, with masks and vaccinations and mandatory. And look at the absconding from conscience and dignity and power of our own government. And we wonder why there are suicides from returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan, 60 a day. The corruption of consciousness is the point. You can point fingers all day long. I ran to a monastery as a young boy because I could not get my hands around the horror of the wars all throughout history, the lies, the distortions, people looking at you right in the eyes with their sociopathic, pathological filter and telling you something that is completely aberrant to conscience, to God, to Jesus, to Buddha, to Allah, to the sanctity, to the spiritual essence of all life in this cosmos. And they create a mini Srebrenica right there in front of you through that level of distortion and lie. The collusion required to go to war, forever wars. And right there is that edge. We must stop praying alone. We must stop congregating alone. We must stop singing hymns alone. We must stop low dosing alone. We need a collective, radically large, one person at a time, but I'm saying a collective civil disobedience to rise up to challenge the corruption of leadership, absence of leadership in America, in Europe, in Canada, Australia, the United Nations. We must create an act of world Dharma civil disobedience that is so thunderous in our behavior that we are willing to interrupt our own comfort to do everything to save the lives of those 280 girls and women in Afghanistan's orchestra of music. Could be your wife, it could be your daughter, your aunt, your mother. I know in Srebrenica, when I was out there and looking into those mass graves, and there were a lot of them, and here it is today, remembering an event that happened, 25 years ago. You never really shake the smell of putrefying human flesh. Never really drop that. And I would say that we need something in the halls of power that is the smell of humans putrefying flesh, and that we force our leaders to smell death. Not perfumes, and not power, and not privilege, and not prose, and not fancy wines and fine china, but putrefying human flesh. We also need to tie these men and women to the chairs of power and force them to hear the screams of these girls and these mothers being raped by the satanic cult of the Taliban, so that we create a collective Clockwork Orange effect. We need to interrupt the mass apparatus of delusion on this planet. And I am going to dedicate the remainder of my days over these coming year, if I live that long, to creating thought streams, mind streams, live streams, poems, films, this World Dharma video course that we're offering freely to get it out there as quickly as we possibly can. I have such limited time and capacity. Please help. We're going to offer it freely. We want to participate in the interruption of evil. This has crossed the line. What's gone down in Afghanistan, what's going down in Burma, to me, is the Srebrenica of today. It's the genocide of democracy in Hong Kong, the genocide of democracy in Burma, the genocide of freedom in Tibet, the genocide of human rights within mainland China by the CCP, the obliteration or the attempt at the obliteration of freedom of choice in our country by the medical tyranny, the pornography of pharmaceutical tyrants, and those who are the running dogs of those particular CEOs of evil. We don't need you telling us what we must do in order to live in our own country. There is such a backlash for those in society who are frightened of passion. Someone needs to get into the face of the president with outrage. Someone needs to get into the mind of our congresspeople with outrage. That it's not a partisan issue. It's not a divisive issue. It's an issue of conscience. I've announced several times that I've almost completed it, actually, a film, a monologue, a spoken word, scream, rant, hymn. It's going to have a lot of different dimensions that I'm playing with at the moment, different titles, but one that keeps coming to mind based upon a conversation I had with a gentleman here on the island. One word put together: raw war. And I hear those words in my heart, and I go like, God, it's a little bit different than walking the beach down at Baldwin today. It's a little bit different than mindfully drinking some nice, fine Chardonnay. But those girls in Kabul going back to be desecrated by the satanic jihadists. I have a daughter. I'm outraged. If empathy means anything, it means my daughter are those 280 women and girls, the Afghan orchestra, guitar playing, gem goddess, singers, lovers, pianists, cellists. There's something at the heart of that for me, right? A Srebrenica on our watch. We never thought it would happen again, and it's happening. Millions of people are going to leave Afghanistan, flood neighboring countries. They're coming into the world now. And the next, and the next. When will this stop? When will it stop? When will this march of calculated stupidity, could it be just stupidity? Or is it a calculated act that looks chaotic and incompetent, but it's part of a different paradigm of dots being connected to a kind of, is it a great reset? Is it a totalitarian QAnon, or is this real authoritarianism? How could it be so stupid as to leave a country behind, to be raped and massacred and assassinated and humiliated, and having those girls turned away who are legitimately supported and flying out 393 feet from freedom? I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of alligator tears out there in our government right now, but you know, I say bench the dude. Put him in a meditation retreat and give him a high dose of ayahuasca with some beautiful women to teach him about intimacy and love. That goes across the board for all the men in government, all the people in the United Nations, all the CEOs, all the women as well. They need absolute, radical, existential, spiritual, psychological, emotional therapy with high doses of ayahuasca and psilocybin They need to understand the power of the human heart over evil, corruption, and money. I'm going to do a film. I've written a book, Extinction X-Rated. It's based upon that. I'm going to do all that I possibly can. Those of you who want to help support me, you want to fund it, you want to offer editing support, reach out to me. This is the time. There is no time to wait. Those girls were turned away. We should be so outraged that we never, ever, ever support this idiotic bullshit regime again in my country, your country of America. So I'll leave it at that. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in. And question one, the most important questions that one can ask oneself. I'm constructing a workbook right now this week. And if you have questions you want me to consider, please send them to me. What are the most important questions that you feel, we feel, one can ask of themselves to understand how they create, how I create self-generated conflict, how I can beautify consciousness. I have plants in the house. They grow based upon light, minerals, soil, air. What's the mineral, the soil, the light, the air of our own human life? How do we nurture the best of ourselves? At the same time, not neglect the billions of girls in the orchestra of life, not just in Afghanistan. We cannot leave anyone behind in this process, because soon we're going to go over the edge of an extinction in every human life that we know, outside of a few million perhaps, and most of the non-human life will go with us. It's stating the obvious. The planet is red hot, and we're participating in it. This is the time to change by stopping the locomotive of ignorance and to participate in a trans-religious, trans-spiritual, roll up the sleeves but not high enough to be jabbed moment where everyone needs to fuse their religion with their heart and their activism, their musicality, their theater. We must find 10 million different ways to create a sonic tsunami of transformation that awakens, truly awakens the heart of the paralyzed, because we don't need to just convert those who are already converted. We need to talk to power by talking to each other and creating unthinkable art, unthinkable music, unthinkable literature, unthinkable movies. I'm going to do my own version of that. But think out of the box. How to non-violently, if you were invited to the White House today and you had Dr. Jill and heart compromised, mind compromised Biden and all of those other idiots running this company called America, and you had the United Nations, you had your Greta Thunberg moment, all simultaneously, live on CNN, live on the BBC, live on the New York Times, and you had your hour, what would you goddamn say and do? You could do anything. You could say anything. Or you could ask the question. Question number one. What's the most important question you can ask yourself today in your life to completely stand up in high solidarity with the most dignified posture, emboldened by conscience and radical, outrageous compassion, with innovative, intelligent wisdom, and you are the orchestra now, leader of those 280 girls that have been left behind. How are you going to spring them to freedom? What's the most important question you can ask yourself? And so I'm going to take this into the day and ask myself the same question. What's the most important question you can ask yourself? Question number one. In the workbook of the World Dharma video course about to be offered freely on YouTube worldwide, and hopefully multiple translations. From my heart to yours, thank you for tuning in today. God willing, see you tomorrow, 9:30 here from the occupied islands of Hawaii.